I am Pastor Dave.
I am recovering heretic Dan.
We haven't done this in a while.
No,
so, hi,
but
Dan.
I was also enjoying like the mock freeze frame
Right,
at the beginning.
Oh, okay, now. All right. Well, welcome.
And yeah, it's been a couple weeks. We are on topics that relate to what the Holy Week, Easter, the Passion, the whole shebang was like back for Jesus and the disciples, because we definitely see it very differently today than they would have. We're going to vary a little bit today. Instead of going into specific questions, we're going to go with an interior sub-theme of that.
Okay.
And that is, the whole point that here you've got this vast and powerful God who yet becomes human and suffers and dies.
Yep.
So this kind of is so central to our theology, and yet, is it wrong to humanize God?
I mean, the answer is both yes and no, right? It's like, on a certain level, no, because, because Jesus is fully human, right?
Yeah.
So the technical language is all that it means, full humanity has been assumed into God.
Yeah.
And so he is human, right? Like in a certain, piece of it, right? So in that regards, no. And then in a certain regard, yes, just because you need to remember that while God has assumed all humanity, right, he is still wholly other, is kind of the official vocabulary term, right? He is so completely different from any other substance or creature in this universe as to be beyond classification, and so you need to remember to kind of hold, Lutherans would say, you need to hold that paradox in your head, right?
Yeah.
Of he is both he has assumed full humanity, and he is not quite, and he's totally different than us, right?
Yeah.
And and both those things play a role in redemption, right? Because the early church fathers would say, they had a saying, their maxim was, that which is not fully assumed is not fully saved. So if Jesus isn't fully God and fully human, then something hasn't been fully assumed into God, and therefore it's not fully saved. So you need both ends of that paradox in order for the whole thing to work.
Yeah. Okay. I got a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, a quick caveat. Renee and or Kate, since I don't have my computer, if you would monitor the comments and give us the questions as they come up. So yeah, keep typing in your questions, but we will have a runner relay them for us. The follow-up then to that is, did Jesus know? Because there's a lot in the Bible that seems to imply, including the fact that the apostles themselves aren't aware of it, did Jesus know that he was also God? Because it does seem like he has this gradual awakening.
Yeah, I mean, not just in John, but in Matthew too, Jesus is saying, I and the Father are one, right? There's this unity of principle, between Jesus and the Father. So that is happening pretty early on,
But the apostles don't pick up on it, so it seems like something that maybe he was...
Well, the apostles are idiots. So... No, they're not going to. They don't pick up on it. Yeah, they don't pick up on it. I mean, it's so, they just don't pick up on it. In their defense, it is so different from kind of the classically Jewish conception of God, that I could see why they had a struggle with it. It's that God is tangible and, present in a human being is not typically how first century Jews thought of God, so I could see why there would be struggle with it,
Well, and then that then gets into I think it's close to the beginning, if not the opening line of 1 John's reading today. In there he says, no one has ever seen God. And yet, there are plenty of examples in the Old Testament of people, Moses, has tea with him every day.
Yeah, but he doesn't see him face to face, right? So like that's actually a big deal for Moses, is that like he gets to see God's back, like that's about as close as any human being has ever gotten. And
so what happened with like Abraham, when God comes to the tent and chats with him?
Yeah, so that's in like incarnated form, and like Genesis doesn't tell us, but typical interpretation is that's angel, like an angel, and not necessarily like God himself, and I think
so. They're God's proxies.
Yeah,
even though the Bible says it is God.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Old Testament exists both at the same time, right? That there's this idea in the Old Testament that if you ever saw God face to face, you'd die, like just it'd be like a bug going up to one of those zapper things, just dead, like when people like touch the ark and it just kills them, like right there, just your body cannot handle, the full presence of the Almighty, which is why when like Isaiah is transported up to heaven and he's in the throne room of God, that's why his first reaction is, woe is me, I'm going to die. Like he's pretty certain he won't survive this experience, right? So there's that attitude, and so the result of that is, and that carries forward, right, that the Christian logic would say that, you're right, nobody has ever seen the Father. So to see God face to face, we look to Jesus. When you're looking on Jesus, you are fully looking on God,
Doesn't that imply that Jesus is a watered down version of God then?
Well,
we can behold him and touch him, and you don't even get like that little spark you get
I
when
wouldn't
you
say
rub on the carpet.
I wouldn't say watered down. That's part of the miracle of the incarnation. That's why the incarnation's important, right? Is that we get this wonderful gift that we get the fullness of God in bodily, tangible form. Thanks be to God for that kind of thing. So it's not watered down. It's just it's done in such a way that we can handle it, and thanks be to God that it is.
Well, let's move up. Oh, we're getting the high sign. Go ahead.
Steve asked, Jesus is fully human, then why do people call him God? But Jesus keeps calling himself the Son of God.
Okay, and so for people at home, Jesus, if he's fully human,
then why do people call him God?
Yeah, then why do people call him God? And why does he refer to himself as Son of God?
So he is both, the classical Trinitarian formulation of this is he is both fully God and fully man. He is 100% both things at the same time. And then we could get into all sorts of philosophical nonsense.
About why it's 200% instead of 100%.
Well,
when you can
why
only
it's
max
two,
out at 100%.
Yeah, well, right, why it's two separate 100%s.
Yeah.
Not 200% and not 50-50.
Yeah. Well, and you've mentioned before that was one of the big arguments in the early church.
We argued that there's about a century and a half where the Christians argued the exact formulation of this. So there's a huge debate. There's an entire council over whether he has one will or two. Does he have a divine will and a human will, or is there one will? The answer is there are two wills.
Well, and even that, though, then, because today we say the Trinity.
Yeah.
So early on, was the Holy Spirit not factored in? Originally, it was a duopoly, and then it became a Trinitarian argument?
No, it was. It was just the early debates are over the nature and person of Christ, sorting out his exact, because of that maxim, right, that which isn't assumed isn't fully saved, right? So you had to sort out what was his exact relationship to his divine beingness, right? And then, so it's not that the Trinity it's not that the Holy Spirit wasn't there, it's that they were sorting out the nature and person of Christ. Christology is what we call it. The doctrine of Christ, in his. So anyway, the full answer, Steve, is he is both fully human and fully man, neither confusing the substances nor confusing the persons.
So we can basically say Jesus and God have quantum entanglement.
Yeah, I mean, he is fully God and fully man. The God part, it's not like he's 50% God and 50% man, right? That's not it. It's not that he's 100% God in a human shell. That's not it. And it's not that he is a divine human, right? He is fully human in all that it means to be fully human, and fully divine in all that it means to be fully divine, you know.
So if he knew, Jesus,
yes,
that he was fully God,
yeah,
isn't that a little bit of a cheat on the suffering side? Because if I know, well, yeah, but I'm God, so I'll be back. This death thing isn't, he wouldn't have the same fear of death as a regular human who might be like, that's it, I'm snuffed out, I got this one life, and it's done. The Sadducees are right.
yeah.
That's a very different fear than it's like, yeah, I'm going to go through a bunch of pain and stuff, but I'll be back.
I mean, I would kind of flip that on its head and say, wouldn't it be more terrifying? You know, think of a classical definition of God, right? God doesn't suffer because God's unchangeable, and suffering involves change, right? So God's never suffered.
Yeah, and fear would involve change too, though, and yet we have the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, well, right, but that's what I mean.
Okay.
Isn't this whole experience more terrifying because it's God taking on something that has never happened before? You know, can you imagine suffering for the very first time?
Yeah, never knowing.
Being afraid for the very first time, you know, like it would be existentially crippling, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, and so I would say it's the reverse actually, that it's worse, even though yes, there's this end, but it's worse because, you know, this is something God doesn't do on a regular basis.
Then it reminds me of Brandon Routh, Superman. Was it Superman Returns that Brandon Routh did?
Yeah.
But the whole crux that when Luthor finally exposes him to kryptonite, he's weak for the first time.
Right.
And they're beating him up.
Right.
And he's crying like a baby.
Right, because he doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah, he's never had that suffering before.
So you can take that logic and spin it that way, but I would, exact same
Amplify.
logic, just take it the other way. Is, you know, it'd actually be more terrifying to be a being that doesn't suffer
And all of a sudden.
willingly taking on suffering, you know.
I'm going to hop over to a more cultural aspect then to get kind of hopping around in this, but we've never seen God. Where did we start getting the imagery of God as this, like Marvel Comics Odin, you know, this super muscular 70-year-old, white hair, long beard, but exuding great power and great responsibility?
Like most things in life, you can blame the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Blame Michelangelo.
So that is, until then, we weren't doing images of God?
No, I mean, where they get it from, I mean, you kind of, for example, like if you go back to like the Middle Ages, like, you won't see a picture of God, you will see a picture of Jesus, right? Like, because, or if you're like, you know, if you read the Divine Comedy, right, like, and you get to part 3, which is heaven, and you get to the very center of heaven itself, and God is just 3 circles, you know, 3 spheres of light, right? Like, which kind of is a downer, but you know, like, but you know, like it's the Renaissance author, you know, it's the Renaissance and the Enlightenment people taking. You know, the Renaissance is like rediscovering all these Greek and Roman classics, so they're rediscovering all these Greek and Roman depictions of Zeus.
So we Zeusify God.
And then we Zeusify God, you know, and then that gets transposed into Michelangelo playing a little bit of a prank and going, I'll paint Zeus in the in the Pope's private chapel.
And it took off.
Right, you know, and it took off. So
So is that why, where Monty Python does things when they, outside of talking God and Holy Grail, it's so often a hand
Yes.
a foot or something. It's a body part. You never see the whole God.
You never see the whole God. Right, yeah, because the Bible does talk about the hand of God and, the temple as his footstool and things like that, so that's much more common. If you go, the Orthodox still have this in a certain way. If you look at Orthodox iconography, right, you'll actually see often that when they're depicting a scene where a character is talking to God, he's actually talking to Jesus, even if it's not like it's like Moses in the burning bush. It's Jesus's face in the burning bush, right? Because that is the access through which we have access to the Father is Jesus,
Yeah.
So there's this, Orthodox iconography still does this sometimes.
What about the whole line of we are made in God's image? Mm-hmm. What does that then imply? And I'm kind of thinking from the standpoint of, was that meant to be interpreted physically, or was it meant to be interpreted as spiritually, that we are of that same energy orb?
Nobody knows. It's this thing that like people attach a lot of importance to, but it's really only mentioned that one time, right, in Genesis. Like nobody spends a great deal of time on it, and then Paul will sometimes talk about us being created in the image of, being formed into the image and likeness of Christ, as a new baptism, right? Mm-hmm. But so we don't really know what it means, right? So throughout history, there have been a variety of answers, a lot of like the Middle Age the scholastic theologians said that rationality was, the way in which we are created in God's image, that what separates us from the animals is the ability to think rationally, and so that must be the likeness of God, some would say, that the power to create, right, is, right, we have art, we have, culture, right, like the ability to create is the way in which we are made in the image of God, I don't know
who said it, but someone actually said, the proof that God exists is Bach.
Right, the proof that God exists is Bach, right, but like, no elephant ain't making Bach, right? And so like that's a, and no elephant's building skyscrapers either, right? Like the ability to make is what?
To transform the environment.
Yeah, and to create things, right? And then a more modern one, people would say Christians especially would take that to mean like relationship is how we're made in the image of God, right? In fact, the center of the Trinity is really, the center of God is relationship. This Father, Son, and Holy Spirit relationship. Then we are created to be in relationship, and that's how we're made in the image of God. But there's no set one answer because they never tell you what exactly it means. It just says, let us make humankind in our image and our likeness, It's meant to be a statement both of value and of separateness from kind of we're not just animals, right? Like we're more than animals, and we are of more value, than that, right?
Well, personally, I think a lot of that's human hubris, but that's a whole other topic.
I mean, it would be if you centered it on our abilities, right? But it's not centered, right? But like the image of God isn't actually something we achieved; it's something God gave us. It would be hubris. It was like we're better than the animals because, I can walk on two legs and I'm so fast and strong, and it's not this. It is hubris if it's something we achieve, but it's not something we achieve. It's
a gift.
It's a gift, right? It's a gift given, And my personal theory is that it's nothing other than God says so, Like we don't get an explanation because it's just God says there is a value to human life, that is different than the value to animals on the street, right? And that's not to say animals on the street shouldn't be valued. They should be, but there's a more value to a human life just because God kind of says, I like this thing that I made, this little hairless monkey that
I've done good on that one.
Right, I've done good. I like you. Like, I like this thing. Don't break it.
Well, we've only got like a couple minutes left.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure, any other comments? None have come through yet. So where I want to wrap up then is bringing up to the modern time in that, and this is a not so fun part, but the whole humanizing imaging of God has been used to justify, well, it was used to justify slavery, but now racism. In that regard, I want to reframe, is it wrong to humanize God, when you go in the reverse direction of my question and you remake God in your image? And it seems like that's what happens a lot with the racism stuff, that you have the blue-eyed, fair-skinned Jesus.
Right.
And that has been used
to
justify.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason there's not we don't get a picture of Jesus, right? And I encourage everybody to go look at cultural depictions of Jesus from other countries, right? Christians in China depict him very differently than Christians do in the West, and that's,
even Coptic stuff.
Right, Coptic, he looks very different than, and the earliest picture of Jesus we have looks different than our kind of blonde hair, blue-eyed Obi-Wan Kenobi Jesus. Yeah. So, that's, that is all true. I would say in general, God is not your mascot, right? So don't turn him into one. He's not, rah, rah, I'm on your side. That's not how it works. God, anybody who tends to act that way towards God never ends up well, because God tends to resist mightily being turned into simply a mascot for your cause, your pet issue. This is the second commandment, right? Do not use the name of the Lord your God in vain, right? Like Luther says, instead we are to use it in time of trouble, in time of thanksgiving, and at the hour of our need, and at the hour of our prosperity. Like, it is taking the Lord's name in vain to use God that way. And, we are supposed to use God for calling on help, thanking in times of good, all that good stuff. So,
cool.
Just remember your 10 commandments. You won't go wrong.
And how to read them. I think
right.
When you've brought up how Luther's interpreted them.
Take your small catechism with you when you read them. But you're right.
Very insightful.
We have free copies in the office. Hint, 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 hint.
We'll mail them to you.
We will. We buy them frequently. I give them out like candy. Hint, hint. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next week we'll get back to more direct aspects of Holy Week, but I think that's a big help because that humanity aspect is a major part of the Passion. It doesn't work otherwise.
It doesn't work otherwise, right? That which is not assumed is not saved. So,
I heard that just today.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody.